Hello everyone and welcome to the Hobby Guard. In today's video I will talk about my very own personal theory about the Blood Angels, Sanguinius, the origins of the Black Rage and the Red Thirst. Now keep in mind, this is all my personal theory, so with that being said, buckle up because this will be long yapping from me. And in the meantime, I'll be just drawing here in the background my rendition of the short story from the Iron Hands from the Horus Heresy, The Keys to Hell, The Keys of Hell, sorry about that. And you know, if you've seen my previous videos, it's the same drawing. I've been drawing for months. It just takes forever. As you can see, it's very complex. It has a lot of detail, and I'm like zooming in and drawing every line by hand. Well, not by hand, but by yes, technically by hand, but digitally, that is. So yeah, this won't be a very visual video, so feel free to just, relax. This is our hobby time. Just start painting your miniatures or drawing or doing the dishes or playing video games, whatever you want to do. Feel free to just listen. Of course, that being said, if you do want to just watch me draw, if you find that soothing or interesting, you're more than welcome to keep watching. And with that, we will begin. Now, quick preamble for everyone just to be caught up. The Blood Angels they originate from the Blood Angels chapter in the 41st millennium. They originate from the 9th Legion, previously known as the Revenants, the Revenant Legion actually, until they met their Primarch, Sanguinius. They have always suffered from two curses, particular to their gene seed, particular to that specific legion and chapters and successor chapters, those being the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. Now, I see some confusion online, people saying that the origin of the Black Rage is actually the death of Sanguinius at the hands of his brother Horus during the climax of the Horus Heresy on the Vengeful Spirits, Horus's flagship. However, I think that is wrong. I strictly recall, I don't recall exactly where I read this in the Horus Heresy, because I have read so many dozens of books on the heresy and short novels and so on. But I strictly recall, I think even in Sanguinius' novel this is addressed, that the Black Rage has always been present since the very beginning, and Blood Angels falling to the Black Rage has always been a thing. So much so that Sanguinius would personally, when able, basically grant the Emperor's mercy to his sons when they were officially fallen to the Black Rage and there was no turning back. They would just lose themselves in the bloodlust of battle, and Sanguinius would march there after said battle and personally just grant them mercy, just end their existence, end their suffering, put an end to the nightmares. But why, you may wonder, would they fall to the Black Rage if Sanguinius has not fallen? Because in the modern timeline, in the 41st millennium, and basically ever since the fall of Sanguinius, we have seen, and it has been stated many times in the lore, and it's been canonically so for a while, that when Blood Angels fall to the Black Rage, what they see are actually visions of Sanguinius' last moments. They believe themselves to be Sanguinius himself, and they believe themselves to be fighting Horus. So they basically see Sanguinius' final moments at the hands of Horus, that entire fight. I want to reference another short story actually, because there is some nuance to this. Some Blood Angels actually, through some psychic shenanigans, I believe, they actually were made to believe, and if I'm recall correctly, they were actually Dreadnought Blood Angels, which had already fallen to the Black Rage, but they are made to believe that they are fighting in the Siege of Terra. So they actually are recalling a battle from the Siege of Terra, and they think that they are just legionnaires from that horrific war, and they have no memory of them being dreadnoughts or whatever. So to say the least, it is a bit confusing, the lore in this sense, in which we have Blood Angels before the death of Sanguinius falling to the Black Rage, or something similar, and yet it is constantly stated that the Black Rage is started or began precisely when Sanguinius died. So, how do we... My theory basically kind of reconciliates everything together. And in my own very personal opinion, this is only my headcanon. So again, don't expect to learn anything in terms of lore. Like, don't apply this to the lore, and if anything in the lore contradicts me, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Feel free to correct me. I think that this theory is not necessarily bulletproof, but again, I've read many books, and I've read most of the Blood Angels books and short stories, and you know, I came up with this theory. So let's get into it more formally. Before we do that though, this theory depends on another theory of mine. In order for my theory to actually work, another theory of mine has to work, and that is that the Emperor, when he created the Primarchs, he actually did so by taking from the warp, stealing from the gods of the warp, which is also very constantly hinted at in the whole Molech planet, the planet of Molech, where the Emperor went into those weird, strange vaults, and he stole the fire from the gods. He made an agreement with the gods, but he didn't respect it with the Chaos gods, with the Warp gods. And something strange happened. We're not entirely sure of what, but as I said, it is very hinted at that whatever the Emperor took from the Chaos gods is precisely what he used to create the Primarchs. So, in order for my theory on the origins of the Black Rage and the Red Thirst to make sense, another theory of mine has to as well sort of be true, which is, and I will go fully into this theory in another video because that certainly deserves and requires a lot more explanation, because it gets very, like, not esoterical per se, but it's a very deep rabbit hole and it gets very dark. But basically, I believe that the Emperor stole the forces of archetypes, of collective archetypes from the warp. Now let me explain that real quick. What is the warp? Basically, it is a reality. It is a mirror reality of the plane of existence that we know, but it is obviously warped by our collective unconscious, by every living creature's collective unconscious. Now, it is not necessarily, I don't believe, completely explained in the lore whether these two realities exist synergetically or one is completely dependent on the other. Certainly characters in the lore have theories on that. For example, I believe that certain characters in the Horus Heresy, what was it called? The group of aliens that John Grammaticus and the Alpha Legion are working for, I think that they state at some point that actually humanity has to lose in order for the Chaos gods to stop existing, because if humanity stops existing, then the Chaos gods no longer have anything to feed on, any emotions, any thoughts, any whatever. At the same time, it is also heavily hinted at that things like, you know, thoughts, emotions, those forces that seem to control humanity, that seem to be undivisible from humanity, actually come from the warp, or at the very least the Chaos gods are representations of those things to one extent or the other. Now, obviously there is a lot more to humanity than things like rage, and which would be the domain of Korn, or things like desire, or pleasure, which would be the domain of Slanesh, or things like I don't even know. I don't even want to get into exactly what the domain of Singe is, or Nurgle, because that's gonna take longer, and that's not necessarily what the video is about. But the point is, these are archetypal forces that exist in our collective unconscious, as described by Carl Jung. So what that means is basically Carl Jung, and again this goes very deep, and I'm probably gonna do a horrible job of explaining this, but Carl Jung refers to various archetypes that manifest themselves throughout history in humanity. Sometimes they manifest themselves to, like, in historical figures in a very clear way, and he references many historical figures and events, and he calls it like, oh, he's possessed by the archetype of X or Y, sorry. And he mentions gods like, oh, he was possessed by the spirit of X or Y god, right? And he gives historical examples which might get my video, I was gonna say demonetized, but none of my videos are monetized anyways, but you know, might get my video flagged, so I don't want to say that name, but he gives some historical examples of contemporaries, let's say, of his. But anyways, I don't want to get too much into that on this video. So basically what he means is that the collective unconscious of humanity is basically constantly interacting with these forms, this realm of forms, of forces that repeat themselves over and over and over. If you have ever read or heard about the monomyth or the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell, well, Joseph Campbell was a very avid student, as I think, of Carl Jung, and that was pretty much his version, his interpretation of the idea of the collective unconscious and Carl Jung's archetypes applied to myths, to the monomyth and to the hero's journey. So that's just for you to get an idea. Now, why do I go into this entire digression there? Because I think that what the Emperor stole from the Chaos Gods was archetypes. He stole warp entities that were actually archetypes, forces from the collective of unconscious of life, of all of living creatures, that were very powerful and that had repeated themselves over and over. Sometimes would possess historical figures, sometimes they would just show themselves as forces of nature, sometimes they would be interpreted by other cultures as gods. And that is why the Primarchs, basically the Emperor, what he did was he generically built bodies that were able to contain these forces, these entities, and he grabbed those from the collective unconscious. And that's why I think that the Primarchs are sometimes kind of redundant is not the word, but they rhyme a lot with other historical figures and with other symbols or other archetypes. For example, obviously Lyman Ross rhymes, or not really historical figures because he's more like a fantasy kind of lame Viking. I really don't like Lyman Ross, but he rhymes, or he takes a lot after the Viking archetype. At least that's what they were going for, or a bad understanding of the Viking archetype. But you have Jagatai Khan, who is like a pretty much one-to-one comparison in many ways, not as much as people claim, I don't think, but in many ways to Jagatai Khan. And obviously you have Gilliman and like Julius Caesar, or maybe there's more accurate comparisons to Gilliman and other historical Roman figures. But we could do that basically for pretty much every Primarch, not necessarily compare them to historical figures themselves, but at the very least compare them to an archetype. Mortarion, he is the Grim Reaper, right? Vulcan, well, Vulcan is Vulcan. He's the smith, he's Thor, he's the who was it? Was it Hephaestus? Whoever forges whoever is the forge god of the Greek gods. Same with Ferrus Manos. I think he's probably a bit more accurate to be a more accurate comparison to Hephaestus, if that is the right one that I'm thinking of. And even the Emperor himself, I think that the Emperor is a Promethean figure. So, again, this is not to say that these are actual deities or entities, it's just the terms kind of become irrelevant, because the idea behind this is that it doesn't matter. Our ideas themselves, they come from the warp. They don't come from the warp, but they exist in this shared reality between the warp and our reality, and they synergize with each other. And the words that we use, the ideas, the emotions that we get when we think of these archetypes, of these icons, are kind of the same thing. And the Primarchs are just a physical embodiment of that. It's just the Emperor trapping all these forces into human-like bodies. Obviously, in order for a body to encompass all of that, everything that comes with representing an entire archetype, it has to be something significant. It has to be something that humanity has never created before. It has to be a literal marvel of creation on the part of the Emperor. And I think that's my personal theory of what the Primarchs are. So now let's get more into the topic of the actual video. And by the way, just to support my theory a bit more on the archetypes being Primarchs and the warp and existence being correlated and synergizing with each other, basically being symbiotic with each other, and even things like cause and effect kind of being intertwined, that would also explain to a great extent why Sanguinius went to a world where they I think that they have like angelic iconography, why Jagatai Khan went to a world where they are basically already like Mongols on the steppes, and why, for example, Angron ended up in a world where they have literal gladiators, and why Gilman went to a world where they are empire builders, and why Ferus Manus went to a world where they are forgers and technomancers, and it's a very, very hard to survive world, and why Lehman Ross went to a world where it's just an icy death world, a frozen wasteland, where it's full of already full of Vikings, and why the Lion went to Caliban, and why Mortarion the Death Reaper himself went to a world full of death and enslaved by a necromancer, by an evil wizard, pretty much. So all of these archetypes, all of these ideas kind of combine together and entwine together. And in my own headcanon, that's basically the reason as to why. Doesn't really matter. It's not like, oh, what a coincidence that Jagatai Khan ended up in a world, he's Asian, he likes speed, and he ended up in a world where pretty much is full of Asian looking people, and they are all horse riders. Not all of them, obviously, but the ones where he grows up with. And some people would say, no, it's the other way around. He became that way because that's how he grew up. And I just think it's irrelevant. I don't think it matters because, again, cause and effect are intertwined when things like the warp are taken into account. So again, as I was saying, jumping back into the actual topic of the video, the Blood Angels and Sanguinius. If my theory that the Emperor stole the archetypes from the Chaos Gods, he stole the archetypes from the warps, he didn't steal it from the Chaos Gods, it's just these archetypes, they already existed in the warp. They would still manifest in humanity and in other species, probably in other thinking species, probably over the years, and they had already throughout many historical figures, throughout history, in the form of many historical figures, like great conquerors and commanders and generals of history, because that's what the Primarchs are. Now, what is Sanguinius' archetype? Well, he's the weeping angel. He is the wrathful angel. He is Sanguinius the angel. So his archetype is the angelic hero. But not only so, obviously that takes a lot from Christian and Catholic symbolism and iconography. Basically, just looking at Sanguinius, you can your brain already, just through being exposed to our culture, at least here in the Western world, and just general culture and knowledge, you already understand, like, oh, that's an angel. He looks like an angel. So he's basically a religious figure. So Sanguinius is also set apart. Well, the things that are like primordial to his character are the archetypes of the hero who knows his fate, and who, even though he knows that he's going to fall in a certain way or a certain time, he still marches onward, and he still faces his fate, not defeated, but courageously, basically. And that is also part of the archetype. Obviously, the Christianity has the idea, the symbol of the martyr, right? Many martyrs throughout Christianity went to their deaths or to their dooms, fully knowing what fate awaited them, and hence the idea of the martyr. Someone who faces their fate knowing exactly what's going to await them. But that is not exclusive to Christianity. Again, it's an archetype that shows up over and over again in human history, in different cultures, in different folklore. The Irish have this warrior, I think, was it the Irish or the Celts? I don't know. But there is a warrior up there who knows his fate. The Greeks have, for example, the Greeks have all sorts of heroes and protagonists, basically, in their stories, who know their fate. Some of them march willingly towards it, some of them don't, you know. There is, if you like the movie Troy or the Odyssey, or the story of Troy, basically, Hector, when he fights Achilles, he probably knows that he's going to fall. He probably knows that Achilles is going to beat him, and still he marches out the doors of Troy to face him, right? So that is another example of this archetype repeating itself. But there are many more clear examples. I just don't want to like stick around too much in there. But that archetype for Sanguinius, and we'll keep coming back to this, because my theory, I promise this will all... Actually, I don't promise this will make sense. I promise I'll try to like tie everything together. But we'll keep coming back to Sanguinius's... what sets him apart, what he represents. But he's not the only one who already knows his fate. The tragic hero who knows that he is doomed. His entire legion, the entire chapter of the Blood Angels and their successors know that they are doomed to fall to the Black Rage. They suffer from the Red Thirst, and I'll get into the Red Thirst eventually, because the explanation for that, I think, is also, well, my personal explanation for that, I also think it's very interesting, potentially. So I'll discuss that. Their successor chapters, even those who don't seem to suffer from the Black Rage or the Red Thirst, like the Lamenters, they also pretty much, like, they are the archetype of the Weeping Angel. Their motto, their war cry is literally, we die, for those we cherish, we die in glory, something like that, right? So it's the same archetype. They know they are doomed. Obviously, they have famously been cursed with bad luck, pretty much, the Lamenters. But the point is that applies to all of Sanguinius' sons, for the most part. If they know that if they don't die in battle, they're eventually going to fall to the Black Rage. Even Mephiston himself, who has fallen twice to the Black Rage and come out of it twice, even he knows in a way that he is doomed, that his entire legion is doomed. And still, the entirety of the Blood Angels represent the not giving up, the marching stoically towards your destiny. You know, like Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill every day, knowing that he is bound to do it again the next day, right? Like Prometheus, knowing that the gods will punish him for stealing fire and giving it to humanity, basically giving humanity a soul. He still goes along with it. He stoically faces his fate. And Sanguinius is much the same in that regard, and his sons till this date are much the same in that regard. Now, I believe, just so I've probably lost most of the people who started watching this video by now, because I'm not only not the best at explaining, but I'm also struggling against the diminishing attention span of the human population. But just try to bear with me. I believe, and this is where I'll drop the bomb, and I'll explain myself in the future. I believe that the Black Rage itself is not the Blood Angels relieving the death of Sanguinius, but rather it's the Blood Angels experiencing a singularity, a moment in time where they have access to all the emotions of their entire gene line. That is, the death of Sanguinius, everything that came before it, and everything that came after. Let me make a drawing here on the corner of my other drawing. And just imagine, let me actually... No, I don't want to cut this entire layer. What? Let me try to draw a circle. So this is why I'm not a professional artist. Just imagine that this is like a perfect circle, like my shirt from the band Perfect Circle, sorry. So, you have this singularity here, which is, let's draw a blood drop. Just imagine that's a perfect looking blood drop. You have this singularity here, which is the death of Sanguinius, right? The death of the angel. And we know that in matters of the warp, canonically in Warhammer, time and space get convoluted. Cause doesn't always follow, effect doesn't always follow cause. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the effect causes the cause. A perfect example of this, and spoilers for The End and the Death Volume 3 if you haven't read it. If you have read it, just skip ahead a couple of minutes, or maybe just a minute. But a perfect example is Samus. The demon Samus, who has hounded the main characters of the Horus Heresy for the entirety of the 7 or 8 years of the Horus Heresy. Very much since the start. We come to find... Let me draw another circle here. We come to find that, let's say, Samus is basically chasing Loken for all of the Horus Heresy, up until the point here where Gabriel Loken, kills Samus. And then Samus is dead, right? But then Erebus, who everyone hates, kills Gabriel Loken and does some chaos warp shenanigan to him that makes him actually become Samus. And thus he becomes his own shadow. He becomes that demon that is constantly going after him and trying to kill him. Now, whether you think that was a horrible narrative decision on the part of Dan Abnett, the author of that book, or not, I leave that up to you. To me, it's not about what happens, it's about the execution. I don't think the execution was deserved. Like the way things happen, I don't think it was deserved. I don't have necessarily a problem with that actually happening. It's just, you gotta sell it better to me. That's basically my critique of that. And that is just a canonical example of that happening in the lore, but it is not the only one. There's more examples of this happening in the lore. There's even on the Warhammer TV animation, Hammer and Bolter, I think it's called Plague Song. It's one of those animated shorts. There is something similar to this happens, where cause basically follows effect and not the other way around. This is the classic paradox of, if you travel back in time, can you become your own grandparent? Pretty much something like that. Now, what the heck, what the warp does this have to do with the Blood Angels? Let me zoom in here to my perfect circle. I believe that this point here in time is the moment. Sorry, one sec. Is the moment of Sanguinius's death. Okay. Obviously, here this is when Sanguinius. Okay, this is gonna get a bit complex, so just try to follow along. I'm gonna draw a timeline, but it's going to be a circular timeline. Okay, just because again in the warp, time it's kind of all over the place. So just for simplicity, let's just draw it as a circle. As far as I know, Warhammer doesn't have a multi-universe, a multiverse, sorry, and thank the God Emperor for that, because I'm tired of multiverses, unless they're done right. Actually it might have a multiverse, but anyways, I just remember another example from the lore where that sort of thing happens. The Dark Angels themselves, one of my favorite legions and chapters. Also, I collect them as well. In fact, I have one right here. Oh, say hi, Dark Angel Chaplain. Anyways, the Dark Angels themselves. Azrael, as I would say in High Gothic. He travels back in time, and he actually, I think, he causes through the use of the Cholja engine. I don't know. I have a hard time saying all those words in Low Gothic. The Cholka engine. He actually might have caused the destruction of Caliban, but it's just one of those things where like he's existing. He existed like thousands of years after the destruction of Caliban, and yet he causes it, right? Okay, so just keep that in mind. I promise you, this theory is not about time travel. Sorry, it won't get anywhere near that level of complexity. It's a lot simpler. So this is the timeline here. This is the point of Sanguinius' death, as I explained, and I'll just draw the timeline in a circle. Okay. So this here is basically the entire life of Sanguinius. Let's draw an L there for Sanguinius is alive. Yay! And all of these following timeline here, all the rest of the circle is not that it's gonna, again, this is not time travel. It's not gonna go back to that circle. This is just a graphic explanation of what I'm trying to say. Is what happens after. I think that, let's say we are in the 41st millennium, so you know Warhammer is a pretty old IP, so in IP standard, like going by the standards of how long-lived most IPs are before they reboot, let's say we are at this point in the timeline, okay? Just for the argument here. I think all the Blood Angels that fell to the Black Rage before Sanguinius died, they were actually picturing the moment in time where Sanguinius would die. And this is not all of it. It's gonna get a lot more complex, so just hang on to your hats for a minute there, to your wizard hats. I hope you better have your wizard hat on. And they experienced all the horror, all the rage. They basically their souls cyclically traveled forward in time, and they experienced all of that, and that's what throws them into a rage. Now, Sanguinius fights Horus, Sanguinius dies. Some people have the theory that Sanguinius, the headcanon, because it's actually no longer even a theory, it's official canon that it didn't happen. I personally, again, I don't care if it happened or not. It's all about the execution. The execution wasn't quite to my liking. So of these like so iconic, like one of the biggest, most iconic moments of the history of Warhammer, and it wasn't as, it was almost played off like, oh yeah, you were expecting this great moment. Well, it's not gonna happen, right? Just Horus is gonna smash Sanguinius. Again, spoilers for The End and the Death Volume 3. Or was that Volume 2? I'm pretty sure that's Volume 2 actually. So consider yourself spoiled for Volume 2. Sanguinius dies a pointless death. He didn't do anything to Horus. But anyways, everything that happens after, you know, You got your second founding here, and everything that comes after, the wars for Armageddon, and then Mephiston falls to the Black Rage for the first time, and then he comes back, and then blah blah blah, blah. The devastation of Baal, and then the Primaries come in, and then we are here in this point in the timeline, and then you have throughout this timeline a bunch of Blood Angels that keep falling to the Black Rage over and over again, and they are all getting visions of this moment in time. Every single one of these Blood Angels that falls to the Black Rage is getting visions. I should be drawing in red. Is getting, because they're Blood Angels, right? Is getting visions of this moment in time. Actually, that blood drop looks horrible. I'll just stick to black. Sorry about that. And that's what throws them into the Black Rage. That's what throws them into a fit. They're experiencing the last fight of Sanguinius. That is the official canon. They actually believe themselves to be Sanguinius fighting Horus, and they look at everyone and they think that is Horus. Now, so far the theory hasn't gotten that crazy. Like, the only thing so far that I have pretty much just come up with myself is that the Blood Angels that fell to the Black Rage before Sanguinius' death are just basically psychically receiving, like, we know that the Blood Angels are very psychically sensitive, specifically connected to their Primarch. So the theory is that they are, my personal theory is that they are psychically connecting to that point in time in the future, and again, it's a lot more complicated than that, but I'll get back into it. Now, this is where things get a bit crazy. What if all of the Black Rage, and I'll address the Red Thirst eventually, please just hang on for a second. What if, sorry about that, what if all of that is a lie? Because remember, when a Blood Angel falls to the Black Rage, they're not completely lucid. Actually, sometimes during visions, they'll say crazy things, and I believe I read somewhere in the lore many years ago that Blood Angels will actually say things that are relevant for the rest of the Blood Angels to learn more about the last moments of Sanguinius during their feats of rage when they fall to the Black Rage. And what if all of that is actually a lie? That's not what's happening. Not that someone's lying to us. That's just they actually don't know what's actually happening to them. They actually don't know what they are actually going through when they fall to the Black Rage. Not even Mephiston himself. He only has a vague understanding, because what if what they experience when their mind falls into that moment, this singularity moment of the Black Rage, this fulcrum of Sanguinius' death, is something much more horrible, much more horrific, that it's just their brains, their human brains cannot process it. And all they can do is point at Horus in that moment and see, this is all your fault. So, this is when it gets, now actually, is when this gets very kooky. My theory is about to get outrageously crazy, so feel free to insult me in the comments down below. I don't think... again, it doesn't matter whether you would like to think that Sanguinius fell to the Black Rage or not. Like, objectively, it doesn't matter in terms of my theory. But I think that when Sanguinius was fighting Horus, he had this moment of psychic revelation where he connected, let me go back here to my perfect circle, he psychically received all of these, the entire, let me draw it in another color so it doesn't become too confusing, oh, that's not another color, hold on, the entire timeline of Warhammer. Not only up to this point, but also the things that we don't know yet. All of it. Sanguinius just plugged himself even for a second. because he's so psychically sensitive. He has visions, remember. He plugs himself to everything that his entire gene line will ever experience in regards to this moment. He obviously knows everything that came before him. Sorry, everything that came before this moment, before his death. But what if in that moment, just like these Blood Angels before his death, when they fell to the Black Rage, they were looking into the future? What if Sanguinius, in his own way, he also looked into the future, and he, not consciously mind you, not rationally, but he psychically, emotionally took on all of the experiences that all of his sons would go to throughout the rest of time? Because mind you, Sanguinius is always feeling guilty. He always has the suspicion that, feels guilt that the reason his sons suffer so is actually because of him, because there is something wrong with him. And if my theory is correct, he is right, actually. They are all psychically connected. They are all mashed together through this singularity, fulcrum moment in time where Sanguinius makes contact with the entirety of the history, past, present, and future of his bloodline, of his gene line, of his gene seed. And through that moment he understands. It obviously the story of Sanguinius and Horus being best brothers and best friends and being so close to each other, and Sanguinius loving the Emperor and Horus betraying the Emperor. I don't actually know if Sanguinius loved the Emperor that much, but Horus betraying the Emperor, whatever. He obviously that's tragic enough. But what if on top of that he had this vision of what would come to be for all of eternity? And what if when the Blood Angel, let's assume that he had this moment, and maybe he fell to the rage. Like, I would be pretty mad, because if he was feeling all of that, Sanguinius is a very sanguine person, mind you. He's actually kind of phlegmatic, but anyways, he's a very sanguine person. And how would he deal with all of that emotionally? He would probably turn it into rage. What will he feel? Desperation, sadness, despair, sorry. But he's bred to be a warrior. Remember, he's the weeping angel. He's this hero who knows his fate. He'll face it anyways. So how does he channel all of that? Well, rage. This is your fault, Horus. This is the moment that you created. You have doomed humanity for all of eternity. And so he feels all of those emotions. And every single Blood Angel that falls to the Black Rage in the future and in the past as well, they are feeling that exact same emotion. Now, obviously, they cannot rationally perceive that. This is just feelings that they're getting. Again, the warp is not explainable. It's warped. You cannot put it into words. You can try the experiences that you feel about it, the things that you experience in the warp, whatever, but it just defies reason. So how can you make it sound reasonable when you explain it, right? But that's exactly what makes them go mad, because what else would make a Space Marine go absolutely mad if not the entirety of basically a time paradox where he sees everything that has ever happened and that's gonna happen to his gene line, and he feels all those emotions and all that rage and all that sadness. He has the perspective of the Great Crusade, like the dream of humanity that Sanguinius felt. Because remember, Sanguinius was one of the greatest generals in the Great Crusade. The Blood Angels themselves, they were one of the greatest generals in the Great Crusade. They wanted humanity to push forward, to achieve the next level of existence, and to conquer the galaxy, to conquer the stars. And the Emperor, before Sanguinius went to the Golden Throne, the Emperor shared some personal insight with Sanguinius on humanity, and Sanguinius, like, on his last moments, he knew more about humanity, about himself, about why the Emperor cherishes humanity so much, why he wants to keep them alive, why he wants to keep their humanity alive, why he thinks that is precious. So it's a very beautiful moment in I forget actually exact book where this happens. I think it might have been The End and the Death Volume 1, but that is one of those moments that I did like from that book. So, how else would they process all of that? It's not rationally, it's not consciously, it's all unconscious, mind you. So, these are born and bred warriors. What do? What do they see? They see the reason for all of that pain and all of that suffering. They see Horus Lupercal, and they don't think they've gone mad, but all they can do is look at him. This is the Eye of Horus, by the way, perfectly drawn here, and all they can think is, this is all your fault. You did this, you're to blame, and they go mad with rage. Now, that is an absolutely crazy theory. It's completely outrageous. It makes no sense, I know. So, feel free to ignore it if you want. But, if you understood what I'm trying to say, and you are wondering now, okay, that is a reason, I guess, that might make sense in a way. But what about the Red Thirst? You might be wondering, Hobbyguard, you addressed one of the courses, but what about the other one? Well, that's a bit less dramatic, to be honest. But still, I think it makes sense in my head, and personally, I think narratively, even if I can't verbalize it or express it as well as I would like, in my head, narratively, it's a more beautiful story. The Weeping Angel, the archetype of the Weeping Angel. What does it entail? What does it represent? Well, going back to my first theory here, that the Emperor created the Primarchs out of these forces of the warp, of the collective unconscious, these archetypes, from this world of forms, you know, the Platonic world of forms. I mean, that's a stretch, but whatever. And then he had to create, like, impressive, genetically modified bodies for these beings. And through their gene seed, he could create the Space Marines, right? Because that's, like, canonically what happens. Now, he gives the Space Marines a bunch of different upgrades compared to baseline humanity. And one of those things that he gives them is the homophagia. The homophagia is the 8th, I believe, of the 19 gene seed genetically modified organs that the Space Marines get. And what it does is it allows a Space Marine to basically gain the memories or knowledge or information from an organism that it consumes. Like, you know, famously the Space Marine, some Space Marines chapters have actually lost, I believe, this ability. But if they consume someone else's brain, they can get some of their memories, right? If they eat their brains. And the same thing happens with their blood. The Revenant Legion, that is the Blood Angels before Sanguinius turned them into the Blood Angels, the Revenant Legion, they used to have a ritual in which whenever their captains or chapter masters or officers died, they would eat them, they would consume them, and thus gain their memories, and thus gain a part of their self. And so the next captain or officer or commander or whatever would take on their name and their memories, and it was a very twisted dark form of immortality. So basically they are taking on parts of the previous, of the organism that they are consuming. Basically they are taking information from it. Now the Blood Angels have a problem with their homophagia because it is described as being completely out of control, and that's why they are cannibalistic, and that's why they are blood drinkers, basically. That's like the canon explanation. But what if there is more to it? Because we know that the blood angels, English. I am trying. We know that the blood angels. The more I speak in English, the harder it gets to me to speak in English, because my tongue starts to get tired from a language that I don't have as much practice in, unfortunately. But, you know, Low Gothic is what people speak, and so I will do my best to communicate. But apologies, and thank you for your patience through my thick accent. The blood angels, what if they... Well, let me rephrase here. Let me retract a bit. They are a very psychically attuned legion. They have arguably the most powerful Space Marine psyker in the form of Mephiston. Sanguinius, even though he's not considered a psyker himself, he has he's very psychically attuned, so much so that he can see into the future. He can have visions of what will come to pass. So, my theory for the Red Thirst is that since Sanguinius is actually the archetype of the angel that the Emperor stole from the warp, again, the Weeping Angel is one of the many faces of Sanguinius. He's also, again, as I said at the start of the video, he's also the wrathful angel and the hero who knows his fate and still marches towards it and so on, but basically an angel. And that is, like, we can look at folklore, at mythology, but presently, today, that is a pivotal symbol to our culture, to our civilization, right? In the form of Christianity and Catholicism. In the form of, not only that, again, that's just an example, but one of many, also in the form of the Bodhisattvas, you know, these ascended beings who choose to take on the pain of humanity and to wait for them before they ascend, and so on, like Siddhartha Gautama himself. But obviously Sanguinius takes after a very aesthetically Catholic inspiration, right? So, what does even Jesus Christ himself? I mean, I didn't quite want to like make that comparison, but he also knows his fate. He also takes in he suffers basically he takes in the sin of humanity, the sin of his people, of God's chosen, and he frees them from sin and all of that. So again, we're talking about tragic figures who sacrifice themselves and who take on the pain and the suffering of others. And if my theory that the Emperor actually stole that archetype from the warp gods to create Sanguinius, when he created the 9th Legion, the Blood Angels, with Sanguinius' gene seed, that made it so that it horribly misfired in the way that the homophagia was overwhelmed with that relationship between their psychic, very sensitive psychic attunement and the homophagia. That means that since they have it in their spiritual psychic nature to take on the pain of others, because remember that is Sanguinius' archetype in my theory, in my head, to suffer for others, to sacrifice themselves for others, they have to take from others, literally. So, biologically, the way that translates is, the homophagia just goes crazy and they go crazy for blood. Now, the blood is the vitae, the blood is the life, and obviously in Warhammer and in many esoteric traditions, someone's blood is basically and even genetically, obviously, someone's blood is a huge part of their being. It tells you a lot about their being. And in Warhammer, like, there's even a point where in the Horus Heresy where a demon is plotting to kill the Emperor by using a drop of his blood, basically. So as he thinks that if he can get access to a drop of his blood, he's going to kill the Emperor. He's able to kill the Emperor, which obviously doesn't happen, right? But my point is, the blood is very powerful. And since we're talking about a legion that is possessed by the archetype of the weeping angel who has to take on the sins and the suffering of others, and since they are warriors, because Sanguinius is a warrior, the Astartes are warriors, the Emperor made them for that purpose. That's why he gave them warrior bodies. Well, then they translate, for example, the Black Rage. That's why they don't go nihilistic or depressed and they just, unalive themselves. No, they turn it into rage because they are warriors, they are bred to fight. So that's how they process things, right? So I think that is actually the reason for the red thirst, sorry. They just want to take on the vitae, on the substance of life, so they can carry on the entire weight of life. And that's actually what gives them powers, because they channel all that suffering, all those memories, all those emotions from those they are eating. They channel them into rage, into fighting ability. Again, that's not how the homophagia was supposed to work, but I think it just went catastrophically wrong with the Blood Angels, because the Emperor, he was obviously dealing with things way above his understanding, even though he did pretty well, I should say. I mean, he did create Sanguinius, but just combining warp entities and entire archetypes, entire forces from the warp, and putting them in human body. Imagine how crazy is that. That is literally like religious, that's biblical, quite literally biblical what the Emperor did. So it's pretty rad. I just don't think that he expected the Blood Angels to actually go through all of that. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of important points of my theory that I am forgetting, and maybe, if anyone watches this video and they actually have any questions, I can address them further. I would love to, because it's actually something that I have thought about for years. Many years ago, when I was reading Echoes of Eternity by Aaron Densky-Bowden, that's when I started thinking about this. Again, we're talking 4 years ago when that book came out. And ever since, I've had that spinning in my head. So yeah, again, I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but my mouth is getting tired from speaking low Gothic, and this video is already an hour long. So with that being said, if anyone made it till the end of this video, thank you so much for coming, thank you so much for watching. I love sharing my crazy ideas and my autistic passions with other people. So if anyone finds them interesting, thank you so much for sticking around. Please let me know by leaving a comment down below, and the usual, please like and subscribe, and please share this with a friend if you liked it, share it with an enemy if you didn't. Now I would like to know your opinions on it. You think I'm wrong? Did I miss something? Whatever it is, please let me know in the comments down below. One thing I did want to address, again, I am not opposed. I was watching a video by Northern Exile the other day. It's one of my favorite Warhammer content creators, and he was addressing the fall of Sanguinius to the Black Rage and how much it would have been much better, and so on and so on. Again, for me, it's all about the execution. I kind of don't care one way or the other, as long as you sell it to me properly. But my entire theory is not necessarily opposed to that. Sanguinius might have actually fallen to the Black Rage, because, again, it's kind of redundant. It doesn't matter, because the Black Rage is not a thing. It's a moment, a single moment in time, a singularity, a fulcrum. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. You can still have this headcanon if you want. I'll give it away to you. And Sanguinius might still have gone bat, shit, insane at Horus, and he might have still fallen to the Black Rage, because Sanguinius is the Black Rage. So with that being said, thanks so much for coming, thanks so much for watching. Ad Astra, and remember, there are no female custodies.